Some Russian soldiers at the front are convinced that they are being deliberately killed off by their own government so their families can begin a new life at home with Muslim immigrants, which is quite the series of words to string together. But we've also got a pretty powerful clip showing Ukrainians hunting down Russian soldiers abusing civilians caught in the occupied territories, a take on why Ukraine is winning this war, and Russian sources that are starting to warn of a coming false flag attack to pull NATO into the war. That's a lot, so let's get started. Beginning with this article in Vertska, talking about Russian mobilized soldiers and how conspiracy theories are starting to spread throughout the ranks. They say, quote, "I wish we could all go home together at the same time. They'd be shocked how the mobilized are living 3 years later." Now, Vertska is a Russian independent media outlet. I will link this article in the description below. And they describe themselves as united to write about Russia without censorship, pressure, or manipulation. And what they focus in on here for this article is talking to mobilized soldiers still in uniform and how their perspectives have changed since they entered the service, some of them 3 years ago. Now, a lot of these, when they were conscripted, and they answered their draft notice and joined the Russian military, thought that they would be serving 3, 6, maybe 9 months total in uniform. All of that, of course, inside of Russian territory, likely far from the front lines. And that's just not how it's played out. Any number of different examples of mobilized soldiers either being mobilized and sent directly to the front, maybe being tricked, or slowly, like we have with some of these guys, working their way from rear positions to frontline assault troops. They note that in this group that they talk to, they're no longer shy about sharing their emotions, which they say is new compared to previous years. They start right out the gate talking about how conspiracy theories are spreading widely amongst the mobilized soldiers, not just about the Nazis taking Zelensky hostage, which is a new one for me, that there's like Nazis in Kyiv that have Zelensky at gunpoint and running the government. But that's one of them. Another one, strangers, they say. Soldiers serving in different battalions, strangers to one another, say the Russian authorities are interested in zeroing out the people and needing to eliminate as many men as possible. A man describes how the Russian side sends men to the assault while the Ukrainian side sends 10 kamikaze drones to meet them. Quote, 10 drones for every man. Why don't we have that many drones? I have an opinion on this that could get me jailed. I think someone is pursuing a policy of zeroing out the number of people. Otherwise, we would have drones flying or driving instead of attack aircraft. Another said, quote, what if our country turns into a Muslim one, dumps Russian men on their own and pays widows so they can start a new family with migrants? Again, the notable thing, I don't want to pretend that this is some significant percentage of the Russian forces at the front. The interesting thing here is this was a theme they heard from multiple soldiers that did not know one another. So when they went out to survey as many mobilized soldiers that they could and as many that were willing to answer, which does skew the results you're going to get, they heard that over and again. The idea that the Russian authorities are just trying to kill as many men as possible. And you can kind of understand how they get to that. When you see these groups of assault soldiers moving forward and they're just passing dead bodies and burned out equipment, and they're not even, most of them, not even seeing Ukrainian soldiers. They're just seeing drones fly in and kill them. It doesn't take that long to say, wait a minute, what's going on here? Why does Ukraine have all these drones and we're throwing people at these walls of drones? Another is still pretty motivated, so this was not an entirely skewed sample here, where he says, quote, we're here for victory. No reaching Kyiv or Lviv isn't enough. We need to take complete control of the entire territory of Ukraine, purge the Nazis. And I think it's worth mentioning that the Nazi theme is continuing in Russian propaganda. It's kind of fallen off in Western-focused Russian propaganda. I think that hit a brick wall, fortunately, pretty early in the conflict. They continue. You can kind of see the things that land and the things that don't, what they continue pushing and what they move on from. The whole Ukraine is a Nazi state was definitely kind of leading the charge in the early months, arguably even year of the war. That's tailed off for the most part when trying to influence Western audiences. We are going to get into some aspects here of what Russia is trying to do to influence the West, but it does look like the Nazi narrative is still alive and well inside of Russian domestic propaganda and especially talking with their troops. They say many of the surviving mobilized soldiers signed permanent contracts with the Ministry of Defense. Almost all of them described ultimatums from their commanders: sign a contract or storm the front. And they refer to this as combat replenishment. So this was a big question when it came to the mobilization. Was we knew Russia was pulling a lot of new soldiers into the ranks, and the idea was, well, if they come up and they're there for 6 months and they can't participate in combat operations and they rotate out, then you got to pull new people in. But we saw a lot of these soldiers signing permanent contracts to join the active duty military, which technically would then allow them to be used in combat operations, although Russia has been using mobilized soldiers in combat operations. What they're saying is that time and again from multiple different sources, and this is not the first time we've heard this, that there's a threat. You're not going home. First off, a lot of these soldiers over and over and over again in these examples say they're just every time they think their contract is going to run out and they should be able to go home, they're told, no, you're actually going further to the front, closer to the combat. In some cases, when it actually comes down to it, sign a contract or go home, they say, well, here's your option. Sign a contract, join the active forces, or you're moving to the next assault towards Ukrainian lines. You can see how that might temporarily boost recruitment numbers, right? Get a lot of people signing contracts in the short term. Again, that full article will be linked in the description below. I want to shift over to a video that was put out a couple days ago by the Ukrainian 79th Air Assault Brigade, where the focus here, and I don't have the translated version, but this is one of those clips where I don't think necessarily need to know exactly what's being said to understand what's behind it. The focus here was on remembering the Ukrainian civilians still trapped behind the front lines in Russian-occupied territory. And what you're going to see in this clip here is a young woman whose baby is picked up by Russian soldiers. Looks like she is abused, maybe raped, as the Russian soldiers occupy her home. This is identified by Ukraine. This is all, this is acted out, right? This is not actual combat footage, but Ukrainian soldiers then identify this location with a drone overhead, send an assault team, and clear the Russian soldiers, saving that woman and her child. It's a pretty powerful clip. Let's go ahead and play that here.
Хімік Ахілесу, на зв'язок.
На зв'язку, хімік.
Бачу двох кацапів з цивільною жінкою і дитиною. Заходять в будинок. Готові працювати.
Плюс-плюс, хлопці, працюйте.
Так, добре, хлопці. Зараз я саджаю Мавік. Збираємося і виходимо.
Слава России! Россия вперед!
So again, pretty powerful. I think it's interesting that this is coming from a Ukrainian unit, not necessarily like a specific unit here, the 79th Air Assault Brigade, rather than like a government office. But you can see how this messaging would be important, especially as we're talking now about the possibility of peace deals or ceasefires or where that might go. And it's easy to forget, I think, unfortunately, that there are a lot of Ukrainians that are Ukrainian, that want to live in Ukraine, want to be a part of the Ukrainian nation and with their Ukrainian brothers and sisters that are trapped in Russian-occupied territory, and they're being treated as second-class citizens, to say the least. There's a lot of people in that category where if we draw the front lines as they are today, there's hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, maybe more, of people that would be, for lack of a better term, forgotten in this conflict. So it's I'm glad they put that video together as kind of a reminder they are still out there. Now, we just kicked off another fundraiser 3 days ago, and we're at $70,000 out of $140,000 raised because you guys are incredible. It's wild that we hit that so fast, but we're going to knock this thing out of the park before we even know it. Now, the goal here is to pick up drones for Ukrainian units, a number of units, fighting in eastern Ukraine around the defense of Kramatorsk. We're running this through Ukraine Aid Operations, solid organization. I've worked with them in the past, very transparent. They are a 501c3, which means that every one of your donations is tax deductible, and in this one, we have a 1-to-1 anonymous donor match. So if you give $1, $2 goes to the campaign. It's awesome. Now, a quick note on that campaign now it'll all be linked in the description and pinned comment below, but a quick note from the campaign, from the soldiers of the Ukrainian 25th Airborne Brigade. Here we go.
Greetings. We are soldiers of the Battalion of Unmanned Systems of the 25th Airborne Brigade. Our unit holds the line at the hottest sections of the front. We help defend Kramatorsk, as well as hold the line in Pokrovsk and Myrnograd. Our boys fly every day and destroy Russian targets with precision and efficiency. Here we are asking Ukraine Aid Operations, as well as the Preston Steward community, to help us continue our work. Right now, our unit is starting up our production of fiber optic spools. We need funds to help make this happen. We would appreciate any help you can bring it to us. Slava Ukraini!
So again, if interested and able, check out that fundraiser in the description below. It's an absolute honor to be associated with that organization and to be a little bit of a bridge between you all and some incredible causes like Ukraine Aid Operations. Now, overnight, we did see the first in a while large-scale drone and missile attack. It's been like a week or two, so it hasn't been that long. Russian drone and missile attack carried out against Ukraine. What we know right now is more than 40 missiles and approximately 500 strike drones were used in this attack. To give you an idea of how significant, how large these attacks are becoming, that would have been, hands down, the largest aerial attack in all of 2022, 2023, or 2024, and for the first couple months of 2025. But it's kind of just flying under the radar right now because this is becoming so normal. President Zelensky put out a note saying, as a result of the shelling, the building of the Cardiology Institute in the capital was damaged. As of now, 4 people have been reported dead in Kyiv, including a 12-year-old girl. He said at least 40 people have been reported injured, including children. This vile attack took place practically at the conclusion of the United Nations General Assembly Week, and this is exactly how Russia declares its real position. Moscow wants to continue fighting and killing and deserves only the harshest pressure from the world. The Kremlin benefits from continuing this war in terror as long as there is money from energy and a shadow fleet operates. We will continue to strike back to deprive Russia of these opportunities to earn and force it to diplomacy. Everyone who wants peace must support President Trump's efforts and stop any Russian imports. The time for decisive action has long come, and we count on a strong reaction from the United States, Europe, the G7, and the G20. So again, this past week, and we did cover this in a couple different videos, a marked change in tone from the United States around how we're viewing this war, and we started to see President Trump talk about the possibility that Ukraine could actually win this conflict. And it's the first time we've seen that sort of language out of this administration, not just neutral, not just pushing back on Russia, but actually saying Ukraine has the ability to take back some of their occupied territories, which is certainly something up for debate, and I personally think would require a lot more than just a few additional arms sales. But following that, we got a really interesting article that I wanted to share with you here from Yuval Harari in the Financial Times titled, quote, "Why Ukraine is Winning the War." And he lays out some, I think, good cases to where there's a good argument here. Now, I should note that we covered in a video yesterday, President Zelensky was in an interview for Axios with Barak Ravid, where he just outright said, we're not winning, but we're not losing. So keep that in mind. Like, even senior officials in Ukraine are not saying that they are winning the war right now. They're saying that they're not losing it. But there is some interesting pieces here that I wanted to share. He says, by spreading propaganda that Russian victory is inevitable, The Russians hope the Americans and Europeans will lose heart, withdraw their support from Ukraine, and force it to surrender. Succumbing to this propaganda will be a disaster not only for Ukraine, but for NATO countries that would lose much of their credibility, as well as their best defense against growing Russian threats. And that idea of inevitable Russian victory has been here since before the full-scale war began. You've heard it. You'll see it in the comments below of this video. I'm sure that, resistance is futile. It's just a matter of time. Nobody could ever stand up to the might of the Russian military. And that's a message that has been consistent from the beginning. And if you think about it, why would you put up a fight against something if the result is inevitable? So you understand why that's messaging that they're pushing. And I would argue that it is probably having an effect in the United States. How many times have you heard that exact phrase from senior officials, or at least people with large audiences and large voices here in the United States? It's a pretty standard talking point. They say the Russians are trying to create the impression that they are relentlessly advancing. But the fact is that since the spring of 2022, they have failed to conquer any target of major strategic importance, such as the cities of Kyiv, Kharkiv, or Kherson. And this is, when we're looking at the battlefield updates day in and day out, this is the type of thing where all of a sudden you're learning about terms like Dopropilia or, small towns in the east that were not on anyone's radar at all. We've had to shift down in terms of what is actually a major importance for Ukraine to hold on to, because these major cities have not been a target. Russia's not been able to target them in terms of ground assault forces. They say in 2025, at a cost of around 200 to 300,000 soldiers killed and injured, the Russian army has so far managed to capture just a thin sliver of frontier zone, amounting, according to the most reliable sources, to around 0.6% of Ukraine's total territory. At the rate they've been going in 2025, it would theoretically take the Russians around 100 years and tens of millions of casualties to conquer the rest of Ukraine. In fact, in August 2025, Russia controlled less of Ukraine's territory than it did in August 2022. So you can move the vibes aside, and if you just look at pure data, that's pretty telling. And I personally think that's something that President Zelensky hammered home to President Trump this week at the United Nations. We saw Zelensky talk about how happy he was that Trump was up to speed on the situation on the battlefield. And based off of how President Trump not just came out talking in support of Ukraine, but also saying, Russia, what are you doing? Like, any army, any real modern army should not still be in the situation that you are in. You're embarrassing yourselves. It seems to me like some of these data points were presented to President Trump to show, technically Russia moved 10 meters further near Pokrovsk last week, right, but they hold less territory now than they did 3 years ago. That's telling. He says in 2025, the weakest link in Ukraine's defenses still lies in the minds of Western friends, as Russia has failed to gain air and naval superiority or break through the Ukrainian defenses on land. Russian strategy seeks to outflank the Ukrainian position by attacking the will of the Americans and Europeans. Nations aren't made of clumps of earth or drops of blood. They're made of stories, images, and memories in people's minds. No matter how the war unfolds in the coming months, the memory of the Russian invasion, of Russian atrocities, and of Ukrainian sacrifices will continue to sustain Ukrainian patriotism for generations to come. So it'll be interesting to see how this kind of flip in the United States, first off, if it actually sticks, second, if it's met with any action, more than just words, but what that does to affect other nations and their confidence or lack of confidence in Ukraine's ability to sustain this fight and eventually come out on top. At the very least, remain a sovereign entity, maybe with solid security guarantees, or at some point down the road, via some mechanism, be able to regain some of their territory. Now, it shouldn't come as a shock that amidst this bit of a change of tone from President Trump, we saw some Russians start to get a little bit upset and say, wait a minute, we don't like the direction that this is going. And one notable thing that came out in the last couple days is we started to see the language around a false flag attack. And we've seen this from Russia in the past, where they start to warn of a false flag attack and then they do something. So it's a little bit of like, get ready for something that Russia might do here in the next week or two. The one they're talking about right now was mentioned on a couple different Russian mill blogger channels, where they say plans of the Zelensky regime have been announced, according to Hungarian media, to repair several downed or intercepted Russian UAVs, equip them with combat loads, so warheads, send them disguised as Russian drones to major NATO transport hubs in Poland and Romania to simultaneously conduct a disinformation campaign in Europe aimed at blaming Moscow for everything, to unleash an armed conflict between Russia and NATO. And we saw this, a couple key ones here, two majors and military informant were putting out their versions of this false flag. This is how it's going to play out. And we've seen the groundwork for this laid in recent months. Anytime a Russian drone lands in NATO territory, there is always a voice, whether it's loud or kind of goes under the radar, depends on the situation, but there's always somebody saying that was Ukraine. That was Ukraine put together those drones, flew them from Ukrainian territory into Poland to try to get NATO to join the fight. And you can understand where that is coming from, because it no doubt would be to Ukraine's benefit if NATO was directly involved in this war. Full stop. Like, there's no two ways about that. It's hard to see the way that this war is trending right now, with more support seemingly coming in for Ukraine against Russia. That would damage relations beyond repair if Ukraine starts attacking NATO members to try to trick them into a war with Russia. So I would say unlikely, to say the least. But either way, as Russia continues to talk about this and bring this front and center, it does feel like they're laying the groundwork for the information space should something like this happen in the next couple weeks. Again, my view on this is the next time Russian drones fly into Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, or Estonia, there's going to be a sizable misinformation and disinformation campaign trying to attribute that to Ukraine rather than Russia. But that's all we got for now. Again, if interested and able in contributing to our fundraiser, check out the link in the pinned comment and description below. You all are awesome. It's humbling to see the support pouring in. $70,000 in 3 days. You kidding me? Let's wrap this thing up. It's awesome. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.